Hi, everyone, and welcome to SLU's latest live show. Today, we are coming to you from the absolute peak of summer in the Northern Hemisphere and the peak of winter in the Southern Hemisphere. But what we're going to do today is we're going to unite those two seasons. We're going to unite how the sun is on all parts of the world, and we're going to celebrate together these two sort of opposites, but at the same time, very unique special celebrations that happen across the earth. I'm Eric Edelman, the producer here at SLU, coming to you live from Smoky Hollow Studios in SLU HQ in Washington Depot, Connecticut, in the Northern Hemisphere. But we're also going to be getting some views from the Southern Hemisphere and from our feed partner in the Northern Hemisphere in California as well. So there are lots of things to look forward to, not only in the sky, but also on the ground. We had a wonderful time, SLU did, at Wanderlust, a great festival right in the center of the solstice, which we're going to be talking a little bit to Bob Berman later on in the program about how that experience went. But for now, we're going to celebrate the sky, the solstice, and the sun itself live with you here in just a minute. And I'm going to be bringing in the wonderful SLU astronomers, Bob Berman and Will Gator, to join me on this incredible journey. And so thank you, both of you gentlemen, for joining me here today. I think it's going to be a lot of fun to look at the sun today, just because of how gorgeous, in particular, it's looking right now.
Yeah, very exciting.
Absolutely. And to start us off, we're looking at sort of one of the idyllic places that we think of with the solstice. But we're going to be, taking a view of the sun like that, and we're going to be looking even closer. We're going to be going very, very close to the sun. And here, coming in right now, is our live view of a very particular part of the sun that's just looking absolutely gorgeous today. And I was hoping to talk a little bit with Will today about what exactly is going on with the sun as we see it here, and also what the sun means to the day of the solstice. So I'm looking forward to going on that adventure with you here, Will. So just to start us off, like what exactly are we looking at? There's something flowering out from the sun there.
It's just spectacular, isn't it? So we've got so much going on here. This is an actual image through what we call a narrowband solar telescope. So what it's doing is it's basically very carefully filtering out all the light from the sun, or not quite all of the light, but leaving a very specific wavelength band in the spectrum, the rainbow of colors of light that's emitted from the sun. And that wavelength is known as the hydrogen alpha wavelength. And it's actually a very deep sort of crimson ruby red color, but we're using a monochrome camera here to get this picture of the sun. So the sun, of course, is not this sort of gray color. But what observing at hydrogen alpha wavelengths looks like, it actually allows you to pick out a region of the sun's atmosphere, if you like, called the chromosphere. And the chromosphere is very rich in these beautiful, dynamic sort of features that we can see here. So on the disk there, you can see these dark regions sort of creeping across. They're known as filaments. They're giant clouds of plasma that are suspended in magnetic fields above the essentially visible surface of the sun that we call the photosphere, much further below. And then on the limb, you can see what we call prominences that are sort of protruding from the limb that are just disappearing below me here, out this way. And they are exactly the same thing as filaments. They're just seen on the limb. So filaments are essentially prominences in silhouette. And right there in the middle, in the bottom of the screen, you can see this particularly what looks like a sort of turbulent region. Look at that, just on cue, change the exposure, and you can really see that pop out. And this is what we call an active region. So an active region is a region where there are immense and contorted magnetic fields bursting through the surface of the sun, essentially, causing a lot of dynamic activity. And what you can actually see there is there are some dark cores there. And if we looked in visible light with a white light solar filter, a specialist white light solar filter, we'd see these as sunspots, those very dark blemishes on the photosphere of the sun, and they are regions basically where the magnetic fields are stopping very hot material from coming up to the surface and keeping it hot. And so in contrast to their surroundings, they're much cooler and they appear this very, very dark black color. But in fact, then, if you could take a special glove and grab a piece of the center of a sunspot, it would still be glowing immensely bright. So that's what we're seeing here, and it really is a spectacular view of the sort of our sun live, on the day of the solstice. Wonderful to see.
There's so much going on. It's just wherever you look, there's something to see. It's absolutely incredible, and it's a great opener, I think, to what we're talking about. This is the sun on the solstice. We don't necessarily see prominences in certain places on the solstice, but the sun is such an important part of this day and why we celebrate this day. That it's great to see so much of what the sun has to offer on this day in particular. And so
Yeah.
as we're moving into this, why exactly is the sun so important to the solstice? What is it doing? Like as we're looking at it live from California, as we will be looking at it live from Chile, what does the sun mean to this day?
Well, essentially, if we go back to the sort of astronomical definition of what the solstice is, so what basically if we were going around the sun with our rotational axis perfectly sort of parallel to the rotational axis of the sun, we'd get a very boring solstice. We wouldn't actually get it. We would just continually basically see the sun rising and setting in the same place all the time, and it'd be fairly boring. But the Earth axis is actually tilted to 23.4 degrees, and what that means is that as we go around the sun, the different hemispheres point either towards or away from the sun. And what's happening at this moment is actually the sun is at a point on the path across the sky that we call the ecliptic, that's furthest from an imaginary line we call the celestial equator. And so what this means is essentially in the northern hemisphere, we celebrate what we call the summer solstice, but perhaps we should more sort of correctly call it the June solstice. And therefore we get the longest day. So the sun is above the horizon for the longest period. And it's a great time, traditionally throughout cultures, throughout history, and even up today, we celebrate this time as a point of great celebration because the sun is at its highest. And you get these wonderful celebrations. And I think that's kind of part of what we're doing here. We've seen these live views, we're celebrating the sun. This is just a continuation of that.
And we have this interesting diagram here that shows how one hemisphere gets a little bit more activity than the other. And there's this great image actually that was taken by the NASA Ceres instrument that really shows this in even greater detail. This is what the June solstice looks like in terms of the sunlight the different hemispheres receive. And so you see a significant variation from the northern to the southern. You're getting a bit more of the blue of the darkness at the bottom of the southern hemisphere versus a little bit more light and activity at the top. And it's just really fascinating to see. And here's a comparison with what the December solstice, or the winter solstice, as we call it in the northern hemisphere, would look like. That we would have less light in the northern hemisphere, and there would be a little bit more light in the southern hemisphere. And so this is just a continuous cycle that changes and changes as we go on. And this is actually a great time to bring in our southern hemisphere image that we're getting from the ESO in Chile, that we can see the sun just coming in right there. And so we see the sun, and it looks a little bit low in the sky with long shadows. And
Mm.
so, what are sort of maybe the what differences should we look out for in terms of a sun in the southern versus the northern hemisphere on this June solstice, Will?
Yeah, so there are several sort of interesting things that have been noted all throughout civilization, and you basically struck on the one that is perhaps most noticeable, and that's that during the winter solstice, on the day of the winter solstice, you do get these very long shadows. So in the southern hemisphere, you get the longest shadow that you could possibly get, whereas when it's essentially local noon at the solstice in the northern hemisphere, you get this basically no shadow at all because the sun's highest in the sky, and it's basically not casting the shadow at all. So I don't know. Do you have a picture from the northern hemisphere that we could see, and you can actually contrast, and you can actually see those differences? But so that's one of them. I mean, yeah, perfect. There you go. So you can see the sun shining down and a very very small shadow. But if you did that in the winter solstice, the shadows would be much much longer. And this is something that people have noticed, as I said, for millennia really. From an astronomical point of view, the summertime is the best time to essentially observe the sun with specialist solar telescopes and specialist solar filters, like we've got with our fantastic live views from California, because the sun is riding very very high in the sky. But summer, conversely, is not a good time to look at the planets, for example, because if you remember, I was talking earlier about that band that the sun passes, or at least the track that the sun passes through the sky, that we call the ecliptic. This is essentially this imaginary line that we paint onto the sky. That actually, the planets tend to follow this line as well, because it's actually an extension of the planetary, or at least the Earth's orbital plane out into space. And so at night, in the summer, that is not particularly high, and so the planets tend to be not particularly good for observing. Conversely, in the winter, when we're celebrating winter solstice, if you get sort of planetary oppositions around that time, the ecliptic is very high in the sky, and so that's a great time to look at planets in the northern hemisphere. You see the planets very, very clearly because they're riding high in the sky. You don't get all those sort of atmospheric effects. So, going back to these live views, you can see with the sun high in the sky from California, just look at the detail that you see. It's just a great time really to observe the sun in this way.
It really, really is. And I just wanted to make a special, note and thank you to our feed partner in California, Matt Francis, for providing us with these sunny, gorgeous views. He was the one who we saw casting his shadow there. He's our representative shadow in the northern hemisphere. So a shout out to Matt Francis for that, and of course to these images as well. And yeah, the sun is just really coming out and firing on all cylinders today, which is so much fun to see. And there's so we see this really extreme example on the solstice, looking from the northern and southern hemispheres, of the differences in seasons. And so we were talking a little bit about it earlier, but there's actually some common misconceptions about why seasons happen that I think we, as a slew folk on the air, can perhaps solve. And as we're solving things like this, feel free, viewers, to ask us questions, things that you're curious about, things that maybe you'd want to know in more detail, uh, at the hashtag global solstice. That's what we're using today on Twitter, and we would love to answer some of your questions live on the air. So do pursue that with us if you have some curiosities about the solstice and the sun, et cetera, et cetera. But for now, posing the question, we're talking a bit about sort of the differences in height of the sun in different hemispheres, and there's actually a large thought that the reason that it gets colder in certain seasons and warmer in others is because there's times when the Earth is closer to the sun than at other points, and that's not necessarily true, is it?
No, that's right. In fact, when the Earth is closest to the sun, we in the northern hemisphere experience our winter. So you think you're going to be hotter, toasty, and we should say that the reason when we talk about closer and farther away, it's not actually a huge difference. The Earth's orbit is elliptical, so it's not a perfect circle. But yeah, so that is a misconception that people think when we're closest to the sun, a point that we call perihelion in our orbit, you think it's going to be the hottest, but it's not the case. In the northern hemisphere, that's the winter. In our summer, we're actually much further away. So yeah, that's not the reason that we get the seasons. The reason we get the seasons and that changing in sort of warmth, when we feel the lovely summer sun. The reason all goes back to this axial tilt. So this 23.4 degree tilt of the Earth's rotational axis as we're going around the sun. The changing tilt. One time we're pointing toward, the northern hemisphere is pointing towards us. We've got a lot more light. There's that nice little diagram, beautifully explains it. And in the winter, it's reversed, and so we're pointing away, and we get much less sunlight. You can imagine yourself, in fact, being somewhere on that globe, and you can see what's going on at the moment in the solstice. Because if you imagine, you have to kind of almost look down a little bit in this diagram, because we're looking, there we go. So here's the June solstice, and so you see in the northern hemisphere, we're tilted, let's say, as far as we can be towards the sun in this sort of frame of reference. And you can see that the sun would be actually high overhead at the Tropic of Cancer. So that's kind of the definition of the Tropic of Cancer on the solstice. You get, it's essentially the point where the maximum point where the sun is overhead on the Earth's surface. And that's what the Tropic of Cancer is there. And so this is how it all plays into the changing of the seasons, because what happens is as we then continue in our orbit, we get the sort of midpoint, and then we get the equinoxes, then eventually we'll come all the way around, and we'll get the December solstice. So this is the beauty of having a tilted rotational axis. And you might not think, well, I said it would be boring earlier. Mars actually has a tilted axis, and it has seasons too. So we see seasonal variations on Mars. We see the polar ice caps melting and sublimating away, and then refreezing and sort of condensing. So yeah, it's not just the Earth that experiences seasons.
And so there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. It's while there are points technically where we are a little bit closer and further away from the sun, it's really about the tilt. It's all about what angle we're experiencing the sun from. And so yeah, thank you so much for talking with me, Will, about a lot of the different sort of solstice 101. What is the solstice about? What is the sun doing in these sorts of on this sort of day, and why should we be excited about it? And I think that we've covered a lot of ground there. And as we move forward, we're going to go a bit with slew astronomer Bob Berman, the author of The Sun's Heartbeat, who's going to talk to us a bit about sort of the cultural implications of this day. How throughout history has the solstice been important to us as human beings, and what have we done in appreciation for this day? And moving a little bit more into even later in the program, talking about Slew's own celebration of the solstice at Wanderlust that just happened very recently, and getting into sort of what happened at that festival in terms of a mixture of astronomy, yoga, and just wholesome appreciation of the solstice. So thank you for joining me for this segment, Bob. I appreciate it.
Well, it's a pleasure. It's a momentous day. Although listening to the newscast this morning, I didn't hear any mention of it, and it just shows how different the emphasis was in olden times. Maybe because people had much less to do than observe the stars at night and the sun during the day. But this was a big deal through history for cultures and civilizations all around the world. They couldn't help but notice what Will was talking about, the sun being low down day after day during the November, December, January, and then high up at this time. Notice I'm talking Northern Hemisphere because most of our ancestors here were European, North American in recent centuries, even people from the Far East and the Middle East. Those are Northern Hemisphere. And we didn't know much about Southern Hemisphere, deep South America, Patagonia, Australia, New Zealand. That's relatively new in human history so far as we're concerned. So a lot of our bias comes from this Northern Hemisphere time of light. And that's what today is. Coming up actually in a matter of minutes, we'll have the moment of the solstice. Now, of course, first day of summer. Summer starts precisely, and it's coming up at 38 minutes after the hour. That will be, so it's goodbye to spring now, Eric. We're in our final moments of spring, for better or for worse. And everybody knows that's the definition of it. But what really happens? Or is it just some arbitrary thing like New Year's Eve where, everybody shouts, but what's really changed at that moment other than the human decree that a new year has started? But this really is decisive and important because the sun is overhead. It's going to be overhead this year from South America, and never overhead from the mainland United States or from any part of Europe or Canada. But look at this image. Now, we're looking at a current live view from Chile. Look at that car a little bit to the right of center and how long the shadows are. Automobiles aren't that high up in the air, they're not giant structures, but look at that long shadow being cast, because even now when the sun is highest in the sky, it's obviously low down. Compare this to our friend Matt Francis, the director of one of our SLU partners, the Prescott Observatory with its great solar telescope. Matt is actually bringing us our solar views from a portable solar telescope. But look at his shadow. It's almost not there, showing that the sun is pretty high up from Southern California, which is where he's standing at the moment. So this says it all. It's a time of, in a way, unity, because everyone in the world experiences the extremes, their lowest sun of the year or their highest sun of the year. But it's more than that. This is the one day of the year when the sun sets as far to the right as possible. And that means it comes in through your windows at odd angles. It rises as far to the left as it's ever seen. And it's moving in the most curved path. It's got the greatest hours of daylight. The sun has the greatest intensity in ultraviolet that burns you or tans you. It's got its greatest intensity in visible light. So a lot of things are happening all together at the same time. Not to mention that the sun itself, as we look at our live SLU view from Matt Francis's, our great feed partner there, the sun itself is a little strange and weird and active and violent today, with a sunstorm right in the center that is having a history now of throwing coronal mass ejections in our direction. This might give us auroras and maybe even some mischief on Earth, with giant prominences erupting on the trailing edge of the sun on the upper right. So it's a great time to look at the sun on top of all those other things. So, wow, are you kidding? It's a great solstice.
Absolutely. And yeah, we're counting down right now to experience that moment that is happening just 17 minutes into our future here. And so experience the moment of the solstice with SLU. We'll bring it to you from both hemispheres, a celebration of winter and summer, a festival of light. That's what we're here to do. And as we're, counting down to the solstice, what about the bare bones? What exactly does the word solstice mean?
Literally means sun stoppage. The sun comes to a halt. But wait a minute, the sun's not really coming to a halt. We can see it moving across the sky. The moment that Matt stops tracking, you can see the sun is moving across the sky, and it's certainly moving against the background stars. So, what do they mean the sun comes to a stop? Well, it comes to a stop regarding how far north or south it gets. It's been, for the last 6 months, it's been chugging northward, higher up in the sky for those of us in the northern hemisphere, lower and lower each day for those in the southern hemisphere. And today is when that finally stops. The sun reaches its absolute most northerly extreme, about 23.5 degrees north of the celestial equator, that line in the sky that stands right over Earth's equator. And that's going to come up in a matter of minutes from now. And that's why we celebrate that moment. It's not human decree. No council gathered around and said, all right, we're going to call the solstice today at a certain time. The sun calls the shots, and this is when that's going to happen. The sun is going to stop moving north. Some cultures have a lot of juice and ideas and interesting, some superstitions, some maybe not, ideas about what this means. For example, in India, the culture believes that during the 6 months that the sun is moving north, that's the best time for spiritual progress. So if you believe in prayer or meditation and the spiritual aspect of life is important, they think those 6 months are the most propitious time to do such practices. Well, you better hurry up, because you've got a few minutes left, and then you're out of luck for the next 6 months. So, so it has meaning and importance, and has for civilizations around the world and throughout history.
It really, and I'm just so taken by these solar views as we're going through this program. There's so much to look at there, and so yeah, you were mentioning that there are different ways to appreciate this solstice, and that we started out this program with an image of Stonehenge, which plays a significant sort of
Mm.
role in this whole sort of celebration. Could you maybe tell us a little bit more about what different places have really taken the solstice close to heart, or close to, in any sort of way, been a big part of the day in human culture?
Well, Stonehenge is almost synonymous with it because somebody went through a lot of trouble lining up those not lightweight rocks to line up with places like when the sun rose and set at its extremes, meaning today. And we have just learned, you and I, with a conversation with Will, that he lives only an hour from Stonehenge. So we're going to do that in the future. I think we're going to send him there with the satellite link and have him report directly from Stonehenge, because that may be the place on Earth that's most aligned, if you will, with the solstice celebration. Although every object, especially in ancient times, that was aligned with the stars, for example, the Great Pyramid at Giza was built to be less than 1/10 of 1 degree, so that the four sides were precisely facing north south and east west. So the Great Pyramid aligned perfectly with the equinoxes. That'll be our next big slew sun celebration, even though we bring auroras and other solar events as they happen. But we're going to definitely be on board with that. So they could mark solstices as well using the Great Pyramid. Now, these days, people don't focus on it so much. And that's why in newscasts, the first item of news is rarely, hey, it's the June solstice today. Usually we say summer solstice because we're in the northern hemisphere and that's what it means. But we try to be universal about it, and because the whole Earth is not here in the northern hemisphere. So for people in the southern hemisphere, this is kind of the good news, that all the weeks on the feeble sun is coming to an end, and that's going to reverse itself. No matter where you are, it's a significant milestone. And it's super significant that we're looking at a sun that's not blank. Hard to believe that sometimes the sun really shows no detail. And our job as astronomers and narrators is to make nothing interesting, blankness exciting. And there's ways to do it, but it's a lot more of an easy job when the sun really is erupting. We have filaments and prominences and solar storms, and that one right in the center may affect us, because as the sun rotates, it's going to move further to the west. And typically 2 or 3 days after a kind of massive solar storm such as that reaches dead center, that's when it's perfectly aimed to follow the sun's own magnetic field lines, which are curved, shaped a little bit like a lawn sprinkler, the way that throws out water. You know how a lawn sprinkler, when it's going around and around, makes the water comes out looking a kind of spiral pattern. Well, just like that, the sun has a kind of spiraling magnetic field thanks to its rotation. So the material, the little broken bits of atoms, and we can, billions of tons worth in a massive ejection, will follow those magnetic field lines all the way to Earth when the storm, the one that we're looking at right here, is perfectly positioned. And it's starting to be perfectly positioned right now and will continue for a few days. So we're going to look for effects here on Earth. Some of them great, like auroral displays, and some of them not so great, like extra radiation and maybe even airliners having to follow different routes than the polar routes they normally take. So we're linked, we and the sun.
Absolutely. I mean, that's really such an important sentiment, particularly on this day, where the sun is so far away from us, but it does affect us. There are some things that will happen, like aurora, that can be linked back to the sun, and also our connection to its patterns, just as a human culture, a human society, also plays such an important role in our own lives. And to that effect, you were just at Wanderlust. Like, it seems like probably just a couple minutes ago. Like, you just got back, didn't you, Bob, from Wanderlust, where it's a yoga festival is celebrated on the weekend of the solstice, which shows sort of how maybe an emphasis is placed on the relationship between yoga and this positioning of the sun. And so I'd love to talk with you a little bit about how SLU's role was in that festival and how we can relate astronomy to sort of the human cultural experience. Like
Oh,
how was your trip there, Bob?
it was great. And a fabulous turnout. We had a room full of people who had been used to practicing yoga and doing all the other activities at Wanderlust during the day. And we brought a giant telescope to observe the setting sun and some of the other phenomena that are related to this. We did get overcast skies. Those of you in the Northeast know about the storm, the remnant of Hurricane Bill that's sweeping through the Northeast. We didn't let that stop us at all. Instead, we did an indoor celebration of the solstice and light and color, and we looked at it from two different ways. We had Allison Grimes, who is a certified yoga teacher and actually specializes in experiencing the cultural and direct ways of feeling the solstice. And we had, myself with the more scientific aspects of it, looking at what light is, and on this brightest day of the year, looking at light and color, and where it occurs in our minds and how we perceive it, and the oddities. For example, that yellow light, almost all yellow light that we see is really a combination of red and green light. So we had lights, we had colored flames that brought out all of these points, and the group really loved it. We had people coming over to us afterward and saying, "Can you do this every year?" And so the reception was wonderful. And it was a new thing for us here at SLU to bring the solstice from two different perspectives: the perspective of the more cultural, experiential way, and also in terms of the science and the more established ways of understanding and appreciating the solstice. So it was a two-pronged approach that went over very well. It makes me think that we should do that all the time from now on. And evocative, too, of the celebrations that have taken place throughout history. It wasn't just the Mayans. They were like, you can't do what the Mayans did. They would throw their in laws. I assumed it was their in laws. You wouldn't toss your favorite people from the tops of pyramids in a sacrifice. I mean, just human nature. So I don't know how they chose who to throw from the pyramids. We can't do that anymore because local ordinances, not just zoning ordinances, but generally municipal ordinances, discourage that kind of exuberance of human sacrifices. So we don't do that. At most, in Woodstock, New York, they're beating drums and dancing. And these are some of the vestigial legacies of the solstice. So it's still happening here and in Europe and in parts of the world where people still have a certain exuberance and a celebration of it. So we wanted to get on board with that, and we did in Vermont. And so that was a first time thing for SLU where we partnered at Wanderlust, and I hope it's the first of many of those. Just got back from Vermont doing that, so that was really great. And I'm seeing, I keep looking at that. If you see me looking at the side, I'm checking the clock, and I know you are too, to see the moment of the solstice, which is just coming up in a matter of minutes now. And that will be the moment, just so you know what is happening. That's the precise moment of the start of summer for us here in the Northern Hemisphere, start of winter on the other side of the world for our friends in Australia and New Zealand and Chile and etc., people south of the equator. And the moment that the sun is most north, the most sunlight we can get for those of us in the northern hemisphere, the time when the sun is directly overhead, right along the Tropic of Cancer. If you look at a map and you see where that is, it's south of the United States and Europe. So if you do live here in the US or Canada or Europe or any of the Arab countries, or even in India, you think of South India or Sri Lanka as being pretty far south, but no, they're still north of the equator. And for all of these places, it's the precise moment where summer starts and where the sun is highest in the sky.
It's a gateway to the seasons in both hemispheres. And yeah, as we talk here, Bob was mentioning we're just about at the moment of the solstice. We're just about to open that door, step through one season to another, and you can see at the top it's just 4 minutes away. And you were just mentioning though that the word Tropic of Cancer, and it's something that people tend to throw out a lot when it comes to the solstice. It's an important word there, but to bring it home, like what exactly it is, we actually have an interesting picture of somebody looking down at Earth at the Tropic of Cancer region from way up high. And so why is the Tropic of Cancer the Tropic of Cancer? Just as we're counting down here, a
Oh,
couple minutes left.
because at the moment of the solstice, the sun is in some constellation. There's stars behind it. We can't see it because the sun is so bright and there's the blue sky. But if you could see the background stars, what constellation is it? Well, 2,300 years ago, it was Cancer. And so it became to be called the Tropic of Cancer, those places on Earth that had the sun overhead. But thanks to Earth's wobble, our tilt slowly changes over 25,780 years. And so as Earth's axis changes, the place that the sun is located at the time of the solstice slowly changes. At around the time of Christ, it moved to the constellation of Gemini, where it remained until 1992. And in 1992, the solstitial sun crossed over into a new constellation, Taurus, where it will remain for the next 3,000 years. So for 3,000 years, Taurus the bull is the home of the solstice, far from Cancer. Somebody should go down there to the Tropic of Cancer and cross out all those signs, all the signposts that say this is the Tropic of Cancer, and should just write, no, 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 it's the Tropic of Taurus now. But it's tradition. Nobody's actually going to do that. But we're only 2 minutes now from the time when the sun is precisely overhead. In practice, the sun doesn't move much in 2 minutes. You know how much it moves? It moves its own diameter, interestingly enough, through the sky, its own width every 2 minutes. So right now, the sun is one sun diameter from being straight overhead at the Tropic of Cancer, at the place that it will be seen to be the solstice directly overhead. So it's moving very rapidly thanks to Earth's location. We're looking at these marvelous live sun views from our SLU partner, Matt Francis, one of the great good guys of the world, who is patiently moving. He's not at his solar observatory in Prescott, Arizona. He's in California. So he's using another solar telescope, but one that has to be repositioned as the sun moves across the sky. And he's doing this with great patience for us as we see this fantastic solar view. We're 1 minute from the solstice. We could say summer solstice for us in the northern hemisphere, winter solstice for those in the south, or we'll just call it the June solstice.
And as we're getting so close, I'd like to bring back in Will Gator, and so we can have a sort of a group experience of the solstice, of the moment of the solstice. And so, you audience members out there, grab your families, gather around, watch the sun, and experience this moment together. But like we were talking earlier in the program, there's a moment like New Year's that just you hit one point and you move toward the other. This is the door to the seasons. And let's experience this together. I don't have any party poppers with me. I don't know about you guys, but
is there a toast? What drink would be most appropriate? What would have the sun's name in it, or would be most linked with the sun?
Some sort of cocktail, I think.
It's a good question. Do we have enough time to make one in 15 seconds?
I guess not. Right.
But here it is, the last moments till the June solstice.
And then we'll say goodbye to spring. Spring is over now.
Hooray.
Congratulations, everybody. Welcome to this new season.
Yes, happy summer. May be a good summer for all of our SLU viewers and for all of us. May the season bring, it's a great season, of course. Abundant sun and warmth.
I was just gonna ask it as we're wandering, into this new place. This solstice, takes out the old, brings in the new. And any thoughts on this day, on this experience? Do you feel any different? Do you feel any older or wiser, Bob?
I feel older and dumber, actually. I don't know why. It just, but You know, it was just great to be at. I'll tell you this: I feel very gratified at how many people enjoyed our SLU Wanderlust experience and celebrating the solstice in person with us in the middle of Vermont yesterday. So that was very gratifying, and I'm sure we're going to do that a lot in the future. So that was great. I'm actually left with a lot of good feelings about this.
And it brings up a great point. We're so grateful to our partners at Wanderlust, and we're so happy that people are intrigued about the uniting of the universe and yoga and those connections. And so we will definitely pursue them. And if you have any thoughts on more that we can get into in that realm, just send us comments. We have contacts on our website slew.com, and so look into that and get connected with us as we try to connect you with the universe. And of course, we're so grateful to Matt Francis for the feed he gave us, for the shadow he showed us. As we talk about, the shadows and the solstice and going through one way and into the next, what about you, Will? Any sort of final thoughts on how you've come through this journey, how you've evolved as a person?
I've got two thoughts. The first is a very practical one, and that is, as an astronomer, I'm excited by the solstice because it means that the nights are going to start getting longer and the darkness is going to start coming back. So there is a sort of a practical element about that I'm excited about. The second is kind of sort of reflecting on a lovely point that Bob made earlier, and it's that you started the program by showing Stonehenge, and it was a time when people really had a strong connection, not just with the sun, but also the natural world and the night sky. And now here we are looking at these incredible live views from California that those peoples could have presumably only dreamt of. And I'd love to think that, in some ways we have lost our connection with the night sky, but maybe let's use this new season and the darkness is coming to get ourselves reacquainted with the sky, not just on SLU, but, going out there, looking up at the sky and using this as an opportunity to, really get back in touch with astronomy and the night sky in general.
I think that's such a great point, and that just because of how we had to live our lives way back in the day, astronomy had to dictate some of these things. It's why we have the harvest moon. It's why um, we had to pay such close attention to where these objects were in the night skies, because we didn't have ways to light our own paths in the night so easily. Way back when the lights were less electricity and more simply fire, and so you know as we're going into this new age of technology that is allowing us to see these things more clearly, we are at a more significant distance from them in a way, because we are not so intimately tied to them uh, by life necessity. And
Oh,
so
you're so
as
right, Eric, about that. You're so right. And that's why I said before that I feel dumber all the time because there's so much to learn. You know how Plato said that one thing I'm sure of is that I don't know anything, is that the more we learn, and we thank SLU for bringing us these celestial objects, the more we know how much there is still to learn about not just the sun, but the rest of the universe. And this is an almost an endless quest in front of us. But it's a great day to celebrate this. Just what we've learned about the sun, the star with the shortest name. Can you think of a star that has a more succinct short name than the sun or Sol? There is none. So it's central, and along with our knowledge of it, there's still the fact that every day this ball of fire is going across the sky. That's how the ancients saw it. Ball of fire is going across the sky every day. So hopefully more of us will pick up on that and see it almost in its primitive, amazing essence, as well as through the light of all our science knowledge.
this is what this day has all been about a string of connections from the northern to the southern hemisphere, from science to our everyday life, our culture and our history. We're trying to bring that to you in as multifaceted a way as we possibly can. And this is a sort of an experimental type of show, and we'd love to hear what you think about it. So please do send us your comments on what you've thought of this show. And if you've enjoyed it, of course, there's more shows coming up very, very soon. We are very excited next weekend to be debuting the first live exoplanet transit, a transit of a planet as it moves across the surface of its host star in our view, in real time. The incredible Trace 2b, or as we call it, the Dark Knight, the darkest known exoplanet in the universe. So we hope you'll stick around and stay tuned for that one next weekend, coming up on Saturday at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 Pacific. And that's just coming up right around the corner. So, we have the solstice. We talk about our home solar system. We go further out into the cosmos. We're everywhere and all around whenever there's something happening out of the night sky. So thank you again so much for joining us. Thank you to our feed partners, again, Matt Francis and the European Southern Observatory, and also to Wanderlust for allowing us to put on that great event there at their festival, and of course to our slew astronomers, Bob Berman and Will Gator, for telling us so much about what this event means in so many different ways to so many different people. And thank you, slew viewers, for sticking around and watching with us. We will be back on the air before you know it. But for now, this has been Eric, Bob, and Will for Slew. We'll see you again. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Slew's latest live show. Today, we are coming to you from the absolute peak of summer in the Northern Hemisphere, and the peak. I'm looking forward to going on that adventure with you here, Will. So, just to start us off, like, what exactly are we looking at? There's something flowering out from the sun there.
It's just spectacular, isn't it? So we've got so much going on here. This is an actual image through what we call a narrowband solar telescope. So what it's doing is it's basically very carefully filtering out all the light from the sun, or not quite all of the light, but leaving a very specific wavelength band in the spectrum, the rainbow of colors of light that's emitted from the sun. And that wavelength is known as the hydrogen alpha wavelength. And it's actually a very deep sort of crimson ruby red color, but we're using a monochrome camera here to get this picture of the sun. So the sun, of course, is not this sort of gray color. But what observing at hydrogen alpha wavelengths looks like, it actually allows you to pick out a region of the sun's atmosphere, if you like, called the chromosphere. And the chromosphere is very rich in these beautiful...
Live with you here in just a minute. and I'm going to be bringing in the wonderful slew astronomers, Bob Berman and Will Gator, to join me on this incredible journey. And so thank you, both of you gentlemen, for joining me here today. I think it's going to be a lot of fun to look at the sun today, just because of how gorgeous, in particular, it's looking right now.
Yeah, very
Yeah.
exciting.
Absolutely. And to start us off, we're looking at sort of one of the idyllic places that we think of with the solstice. But we're going to be taking a view of the sun like that, and we're going to be looking even closer. We're going to be going very, very close to the sun. And here, coming in right now, is our live view of a very particular part of the sun that's just looking absolutely gorgeous today. And I was hoping to talk a little bit with Will today about what exactly is going on with the sun as we see it here, and also what the sun means to the day of the solstice. Of winter in the southern hemisphere. But what we're going to do today is we're going to unite those two seasons. We're going to unite how the sun is on all parts of the world, and we're going to celebrate together these two sort of opposites, but at the same time very unique special celebrations that happen across the earth. I'm Eric Edelman, the producer here at SLU, coming to you live from Smoky Hollow Studios in SLU HQ in Washington Depot, Connecticut, in the Northern Hemisphere. But we're also going to be getting some views from the Southern Hemisphere and from our feed partner in the Northern Hemisphere in California as well. So there are lots of things to look forward to, not only in the sky, but also on the ground. We had a wonderful time, SLU did, at Wanderlust, a great festival right in the center of the solstice, which we're going to be talking a little bit to Bob Berman later on in the program about how that experience went. But for now, we're going to celebrate the sky, the solstice, and the sun itself.